welcome to Sola Church Online.
I'm Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers, and together we lead Sola Church, a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California.
We meet in person and online on Sundays at 10 a.m. Pacific. Our in-person service is held indoors at Joslyn Park Auditorium, which is at 633 Kensington Road.
And our pre-recorded online service can be found on our website, solachurch.life, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. That's at Sola Church LA.
And we have a great service for you today. Let's worship.
Of my enemies, I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I raise a louder than the spoke a word, you were singing over me. And you have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. And you have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't turn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. And you have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't turn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh,
This is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. This might be your first time watching Sola Church online, and we do not want you to feel obligated to participate. But for those who have made Sola Church their church home, for those who've been blessed by Sola Church online, it's really easy to make a one-time tax-deductible donation or even to schedule a recurring gift.
The easiest way is to scan the QR code on your screen, but you can always go to solachurch.life and click the tab at the top that says Give.
We're so grateful to you guys for praying for us, for supporting us, for standing with us, right? We couldn't do it without you guys. Thank you for believing in the mission of Sola Church. Thank you for helping to advance our vision to just be a light here on the west side of LA.
Let's get into our time of teaching.
All right, so let's turn once again to Matthew chapter 5. We are in the next to last week of our series, Thrive. We've been looking at the Beatitudes of Jesus. In the first 12 verses of this chapter, we see the word blessed 9 times. And we've learned that the Greek adjective means blessed or happy or even to be envied. Like Jesus was talking about fullness, about satisfaction. He was starting a conversation around human flourishing, what it means to thrive. And so today we come to verse 9, the 7th Beatitude, which says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Peacemakers? Troublemakers, more like it, right? Like you'd think that Jesus had said, blessed are the instigators, blessed are the agitators, blessed are the provocateurs. I mean, we are so divided. Like we're divided around politics, right? Democrats and Republicans, left and right, blue and red. We're divided around identity. Lots of division around issues related to race and gender and even sexual orientation and identity. We're divided around misinformation and conspiracy theories, right? Like it used to be that we just had different opinions. Now we have different facts. How do you even have a conversation when you're, using different facts? We're divided around environmental issues, particularly climate change, with some thinking that it's an existential threat and others thinking that it's a hoax. We're divided around beliefs. Like here, I'm talking about deeply held convictions about things like abortion or marriage equality or religious freedom. Like we are so divided. But not only are we divided, we're divisive. Like, have you been on social media lately? I don't know about you, but my social feed is a dumpster fire. And there's just something about the anonymity that gives people permission for toxicity. And it doesn't help that, big tech has these profit-driven algorithms that amplify divisive content. Oh man, what would Jesus say about all of this? Well, that brings us back to Matthew chapter 5, which of course is part of the Sermon on the Mount, the best known part of the teaching of Jesus. It includes such well-known things as not only the Beatitudes, but like the Lord's Prayer and the Golden Rule. But when we talk about the Beatitudes, we're talking about these 8 couplets, right? Where Jesus gives a condition or a quality followed by a promise or a reward. To put it another way, he gives us a responsibility followed by a privilege. And we've seen from week to week that while the Beatitudes may be simple, they are certainly not simplistic. In fact, there is a very real tension between the ideal and then our reality. But we've learned that all of these qualities are to be present in all of Jesus' followers. Jesus is telling us what we're becoming, what God's grace is enabling us to be and to do. And so today we want to talk about the peacemakers. And as we've done on other weeks, we want to talk a little bit about what it doesn't mean, what it does mean, and what it looks like. What doesn't it mean? What did Jesus not mean when he talked about the peacemakers? Well, take pop culture, for example. You hear a lot about peace in pop culture. I think about, especially like the anti-war movement, say of the 60s. so represented in music, in film, and television, in literature. And of course, a peacemaker might listen to, a peace anthem, might watch a film, an anti-war film, might read a book about nonviolence. A peacemaker might do any or all of those things, but you can do any or all of those things and not be a peacemaker. For that matter, I think about the person that, might flash the peace sign or might fashion the peace slogan on a t-shirt, or might affix the peace symbol to the bumper of their car. And a peacemaker might do any or all of those things, but you can do any or all of those things and not be a peacemaker. I think about the hashtags I see on social media, and it's not unusual to see hashtag peace. And a peacemaker might well end their post with hashtag peace, but you can end your post with hashtag peace and not be a peacemaker. So the peace that Jesus was talking about is something that is totally transcendent relative to peace and pop culture. So the other thing that Jesus didn't mean by peacemaking is peacekeeping. And by that, I mean like peace at any cost. Sometimes we're guilty of avoiding conflicts, disagreements, or difficult conversations. We're prepared to ignore or downplay problems just to keep the peace. A lot of times, of course, that involves like stuffing our emotions. But most of us who have done this a time or two have learned that all you're really doing is choosing short-term harmony over long-term harm. That's what it ends up being. It ends up being long-term harm. So if that's what Jesus wasn't talking about, if that's what he didn't mean by peacemaking, then what did he mean? Well, again, he said, blessed are the peacemakers. The Greek adjective translated peacemakers is actually a compound word. So what you have is the noun peace followed by the verb to make. And in the Old Testament, the equivalent word is shalom, which means wholeness, soundness. So there's the whole idea of health and well-being, even prosperity. Like it wasn't just a negative thing, it was a positive thing. It wasn't just the absence of any bad thing, but it was the presence of every good thing. Like peace had to do not just with like one's emotions, but with their physical body and even with their spirit. But of course, Jesus wasn't talking just about peace. He was talking about those who make peace, right? Peacemakers. So the verb to make means to make, to do. It expresses action. So it's not passive, it's active. It's not just something that we feel, it's something that we do. In fact, the verb I'm talking about is the verb poeo, which if it sounds like the English word poem, it should. It's related. The whole idea then is that when it comes to peace, we are to be an artisan. We are to be a craftsperson. We are to be a maker of peace, a peacemaker. So what does that look like? Well, when you're talking about an artisan or a craftsperson, you're talking about someone who has skill and expertise. How would it be that we might have skill and expertise when it comes to making peace? Well, because as people of faith, as followers of Jesus, we have peace with God, we have peace within, and as a result, we can have peace with others. So let's talk about our skill, our expertise. First of all, a peacemaker makes peace with God. The Bible is filled with metaphors to help us understand what it's like when we go from, not pursuing our relationship with God to pursuing our relationship with God. We go from being an alien to being a citizen. We go from being dead to being alive. We go from being lost to being found. But another one of these metaphors teaches us that we go from being an enemy to being an ally. Yeah, there's this verse in Romans 5, verse 10. It says that when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his son. And similarly, in Colossians 1, beginning in verse 21, it says, you who once were enemies, he has reconciled in the body of his flesh through death. So it's like conventional wisdom is that we all start out at peace with God, and some end up at war with him. But in the metaphor, we learn that we all start out at war with him and some end up at peace with him. It's funny because in my experience, for so many of us, before we came to faith, it's not necessarily that we were hostile so much as it's just that we were indifferent. And that's what I've experienced a lot here on the west side of LA is some hostility, but by far the thing I encounter is indifference. But so many times, when we think about our story of coming to faith, so many people will describe just those feelings of uneasiness, of restlessness, of edginess that they had, until they found the peace that comes with faith. So a peacemaker makes peace with God, but then that enables this. A peacemaker makes peace with him or herself. And really, in this case, makes is a little bit imprecise because it is the peace of God. We're experiencing the peace of God. He is the source of that peace. I think about what the Apostle Paul wrote in a book we call Philippians, chapter 4, verse 7. He wrote, "The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." I think about in my own life those times when, there were lots of reasons not to have peace, but God gave me peace. And I've seen it in the lives of other people. Maybe even some of you watching this service, where I've seen you have just this peace that you can't even hardly imagine in the midst of a situation where you just wouldn't expect it. When you find out that, you're facing a serious health issue and you've got peace, when you are going through a divorce and you've got peace, when, you've lost your job or you're losing your home, and you've got peace, when you don't know how you're going to get through the month and you've got peace. On and on we could go with those examples, but God gives us this peace that it says surpasses all understanding. The cool thing is that while we can't wrap our minds around it, we can get our hands on it. The verse right before that, Paul talks about prayer. So it's prayer that puts handles on peace. Like we can take hold of peace because of prayer. And so this skill, this expertise, a peacemaker has made peace with God. A peacemaker has made peace within him or herself. And as a result, we can bring that skill and that expertise into this experience where a peacemaker makes peace with others. And so again, we learned about this peacemaking, that it's not a passive thing, it's an active thing. So, again, what does it look like? Well, what about when we've disturbed the peace? What about when we've sinned against someone else? Later in this same chapter, Jesus said, if you bring your gift to the altar, he's describing, going to the place of worship with an offering. He says, and there remember that your brother has something against you. Not that you have something against your brother, but that your brother has something against you. You've disturbed the peace. Well, then leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. So the context is anger. And is Jesus saying that, if we've wronged someone, if we've disturbed the peace, that we should skip church? No, he's saying that we should prioritize peacemaking. It reminds me of that verse in Ephesians 4, verse 26, where it says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in your wrath. Now the sun sets daily, so don't put off until tomorrow what you can do today. We gather as a faith community weekly, so don't put off until next week what you can do this week. Again, it's a way of saying prioritize peacemaking. To put it another way, when you think about those things that are daily and those things that are weekly, we're encouraged to incorporate peacemaking into the rhythms of life. What we do instead, well, one of the things we do is we just are unapologetic. Like we don't deal with it. We either can't or won't deal with it. Or if we do apologize, it's like, well, I'm sorry if, which is a really weak apology. Sometimes we don't know whether we've offended someone or not, but when we know that we have, to say I'm sorry if Yeah, that's just weak right out of the gate. Even worse is to say, I'm sorry, but. Like, I'm sorry, but, here's how you made me feel. Here's what you made me do. Or don't you have something to say to me? Right? I mean, again, we've totally just undone any good that maybe we had started to do. Never underestimate the power of a sincere apology. I think I've mentioned before that my grandpa, man, he was the best at apologizing that I've ever seen in my life. I can remember times that, he might be in an argument with my grandmother. She would be upset with him. And he would just say, Joyce, I'm sorry. And he would say it so sincerely and so tenderly. Even as a kid, I observed how it diffused the situation, how many times it just brought the whole temperature down. Really, really impressive. So that's when we've disturbed the peace. But what about when they've disturbed the peace? What about when they've sinned against us? Well, it's not part of the Sermon on the Mount, but it's right here in Matthew. In Matthew chapter 18, it says that if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. Now, that's not to say that, we need to point out every single thing somebody does, every single thing something happens doesn't have to, turn into a thing. And on the other hand, sometimes things are very serious and they escalate. So if you go on in Matthew 18, you'll see Jesus talk about that. But we just want to take this for what it is, this idea that, if someone else has disturbed the peace, if they've somehow wronged us, then we need to go and we need to have a conversation with them and just with them. Jesus said, between you and him alone. What we do instead is we usually go and talk to other people. That's not the work of a peacemaker. When we go to other people to talk about what this person said to us or what this person did to us or, how they wronged us or slighted us or whatever it might be, that's not the work of a peacemaker. We need to talk to God and then we need to talk to them, like pray about it and then go to them about it. A tool that I learned, and I think I've shared before, I learned this tool in therapy some years ago, and I found it so helpful. And that is that when you have to go to someone like this, you can use this little 4-step formula. When you, I feel, I respond by, I need you to. So the first thing, when you. So then you talk about what happened, like when you said, such and such, when you did such and such. Number 2, I feel, so I feel hurt or I feel threatened or I feel angry or whatever it might be. And then the third thing is I respond by, so feeling the way I do about that, I respond by attacking you or I respond by shutting you out or I respond by, whatever it might be. And then the fourth thing is I need you to. And this is where you're basically making a request, asking the person to do something different in the future. And then you lay that out there for them to consider. And they may be able to come back right away and say, you know what, I can do that. I'm so sorry. I can totally do that and I will do better. Or they can come back and say, I'm not sure I can do that, but what if I did this? And it's like you can negotiate. But part of what's important too about that approach is that, when you say, when you said or did such and such, I feel, you're not saying you made me feel. You're not blaming them for the way you felt. You're just acknowledging, you're naming the way that you felt. And then when you say I responded by, that third part, I responded by, you're not saying you made me do this or you made me do that, but you're saying this is feeling the way I did, this is what I chose to do, or maybe even, what I did without so much as thinking about it. This is how I responded. So, see, you're taking ownership of things as you go, and then you're making that request. I need you to isn't a demand; it's a request. It's a negotiating point. I have found that really helpful, and I hope that you do too. It's worth pointing out. Jesus said something that seems to contradict everything we've talked about to this point later in Matthew 10, verse 34, Jesus said, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. But there's a context for that. Jesus was talking very specifically about the fact that some would experience persecution. And in fact, the final beatitude that we get next week will deal with that. But there he was just talking about how sometimes when you come to faith, like you might even be rejected by members of your own family. And there could be some real, rough seas, so to speak. That's what he was talking about there. But let's face it, in general, there are going to be those times when we sin against someone else and we try to make peace and we're unsuccessful. And there could be those times when someone has sinned against us and we try to make peace and we're unsuccessful. And it can be extremely painful. Maybe there's something between you and someone else right now that really hurts. And regardless of who was at fault, you've tried, you've done what you could to fix it. And to this point, it hasn't been fixed and you're not sure it can be fixed. Like that really hurts. I have found some comfort in Romans 12, verse 18, where it says, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. So, if it hasn't been fixed, let it not be because you haven't done what you could. Let it not be because I haven't done what I could. We want to be able to say with integrity that we've done what we could. So what is the promise? We have the blessed are the peacemakers, but then what does Jesus say? He says, for they shall be called sons of God. Now, it's worth pointing out that multiple times in the New Testament, God is called the God of peace. Romans 15:33, the God of peace. Philippians 4, verse 9, the God of peace. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 23, the God of peace. Hebrews 13, verse 20, the God of peace. So our God, our dad in heaven, is the God of peace. This idea then of peacemakers being called sons of God makes perfect sense. It's not unlike our expressions or sayings like father, like son or daughter. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. A chip off the old block. Cut from the same cloth or in the same mold. In other words, with all of those expressions, what we're saying is that there's a family resemblance. Now, sometimes when you tell somebody that they resemble a member of their family, it's mean, right? Like for some people, if you say you're just like your mom or you're just like your dad, like for some people, those are fighting words. But then other times it's the most meaningful thing in the world. When you love your mom or you love your dad and you admire them and respect them and someone tells you, you know what, you remind me so much of your mom, you remind me so much of your dad, well, then that's super, super meaningful. The week, as you'll know, if you're watching this when it premieres this Sunday, but as you may not know if you watch this online service months or years from now, this was the week of the Democratic National Convention. So I watched both conventions and so glad I did. I think it's important to kind of hear both sides of things. But anyway, watching the DNC, man, there was this moment. And if you were watching, you know what I'm talking about, where Gus Walls, the son of the Democratic nominee for vice president, his dad was taking the stage and beginning to speak. And so his son, Gus, 17 years old, special needs, stood and with tears running down his face, pointing at the stage, saying, that's my dad. Looking at the people around him, that's my dad. That's my dad. Man, it was so touching. I actually, it's just stunning to me that people have mocked him on social media, but I don't even need to dignify that by saying any more about it. For me, it was one of those, I'm not crying, you're crying moments. It was really, really emotional. And of course, we've seen it replayed several times since. And I was pointing out to Miranda, you notice he's wearing the same color suit as his dad, the same color shirt as his dad, the same color tie as his dad. I'll bet that he very specifically requested to be dressed just like his dad. And I'm guessing, based on the way he feels about his father, that if you said to Gus Walls, Gus, you remind me of your dad, he would feel like $1,000,000. Like he would think that was the greatest thing that anyone could ever say to him about him. And if you tell a follower of Jesus, hey, I see you making peace, and you are just like your dad in heaven. Man, that would be everything. To put it another way, when we make peace, we're doing God's work. Like when we help others make peace with others, we're doing God's work. And we talked about how we come to make peace with others. We can help others make peace with others. Who do you know right now who's maybe having a conflict with their husband or their wife, their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their kids, their adult children, their elderly parents? I mean, conflict at work, conflict at school, conflict at church, where maybe we could step in and play some kind of a role, some kind of a peacemaker role. When we help others make peace with others, we're doing God's work. When we help others make peace within, we're doing God's work. When we share with them what it means to experience the peace of God and how they can experience the peace of God, doing God's work. When we help others make peace with God, we're doing God's works. You see what I've done? I've made my way backwards through those ways that peacemakers make peace. When we help others make peace with God, we're doing God's work. And here I'm talking about having spiritual conversations with people. I'm talking about sharing with people our faith journey and what it has meant to us to follow Jesus, to ask him to forgive us and to lead us, and how that's transformed our life and what that means to us, and how they could experience that same thing. Man, we're being peacemakers when we do that. We're doing God's work. But back to this moment, I read an article this week called In Our Anger Era. And that's where we are, man. We are very much in our anger era. Just right here in Los Angeles, this last year, they recorded the most road rage incidents in 7 years. Terrible, right? And nationally, the number of road rage shootings has risen over 400% in the last decade. Talk to anybody who's in customer service, and they'll tell you that, customers are angrier than ever. Talk to your flight attendant friend. We have a flight attendant who attends in person here at Sola Church in Santa Monica, and she's shared more than once, how much angrier passengers are. And so that's our era, right? This is the moment that we find ourselves in. And it's not just out there, it's in here, by which I mean it's in the faith community. It's in our churches that people have turned against each other. I'll say this from my heart as a pastor. My goal at Sola Church is not uniformity, it's unity. Never, ever have I had a goal that everybody would think the same way about everything. Not at all. And I feel like the job of the pastor is not to tell people what to think. Maybe we can learn together how to think better, but it's not my job to tell people what to think. So I'm not shooting for uniformity, but I am certainly shooting for unity. We want to be able to be one. That's part of the beauty of being a son of God, a daughter of God. Being in the family of God is that we love people and we do life with people who may be very different than us. And we value them and we value our differences. But it is also true in the public square. We talked about the dumpster fire that is social media, just as an example. And so if we're going to be peacemakers, here's a few things we need to do. I mean, for one, we need to step beyond our echo chambers. If we're only hearing one voice, that's just not helping. We need to hear other voices. We need to choose curiosity over being critical. Man, if we could be curious instead of critical, it would make all the difference in the world. If we could try to understand what someone else thinks, if we could try to understand why they think that way, instead of just immediately making judgments, so helpful. Also, we need to prioritize humanizing over demonizing. Enough demonizing people, enough assuming people that are different than we are, assuming that they're bad, assuming that they're wrong, assuming that they're morally inferior. Like, that's just so ugly. We need to humanize people. We need to understand that good people may see things differently than we do. And again, that doesn't make them bad. And if we would just put ourselves in their shoes for a moment, if we would just listen to them, if we would just hear them out, even if we never come to agree with them, we might at least come to see their humanity. We need to prioritize being peacemakers over being troublemakers. That dumpster fire I was talking about on social media, how many of us as people of faith are pouring fuel on the fire instead of water on the fire? We ought to be the ones that are bringing buckets of water to the fire. And I have to be honest. I'm really getting good at muting people on social media. Found Facebook. You could stay Facebook friends with somebody, but unfollow them so that you don't see their posts in your feed. On Twitter or X, you can mute them. So, you're still one of their followers. You're still showing them some love, but you're not necessarily being assaulted by their posts. There are ways to tell Instagram and other apps the kinds of posts that you want to see less of. Sometimes we have to do that, but the very fact that we need to do that, even in some cases with members of our faith community, sometimes even members of our family, it's just a reminder that we all need to be peacemakers and not troublemakers. I'll close with the words of St. Francis of Assisi, who said, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy." Amen and amen.
And now it's time to fill out a Connect card.
Yeah, just go to our website, solachurch.life, and scroll to the bottom of the homepage. That's where you can let us know if you're watching for the first time. It's also where you can request information about our virtual smokers.
And don't forget, go and follow Sola Church on social media.
Yeah, Facebook, X, Instagram.
We want to keep in touch with you.
We do. So it's at Sola Church LA.
And we hope that everyone has a great week. And we'll see you next time at Sola Church Online.
Bye, everybody.